The crane didn't just drop through my roof, it came down like a verdict from the sky, aimed dead at my spine, glass shattering, wood snapping, and in a heartbeat, the whole corner of my living room vanished into a tangle of insulation and steel. You want to talk about wake-up calls? That's how you get one, and you don't hit snooze. My name's Nayland Carrick, and before that day, I used to think the worst thing in my life was the weekend traffic, or maybe my kid outgrowing her shoes every other month. Funny, right? That was before Trina Delworth sashayed her way into the Crest Meadow HOA presidency. You know, the type, oversized sunglasses when it's raining, voice like a chainsaw through styrofoam platinum hair, and the kind of smile you could cut glass with. She didn't just love the rules, she lived to weaponize them. Let me back up a sec. It all started over a work van. My van parked in my own driveway, mind you, suddenly became a threat to aesthetic harmony. Never mind the fact that Bob next door's got a whole boat rusting in his yard. Trina slapped me with a fine so bogus you could still smell the ink, and when I pushed back, quoting the bylaws word for word, that's when things started to get ugly. Next thing I know, I'm getting complaints about my trash cans, about noise at dinner time, even some nonsense about running a business out of my garage. Yeah, that happened. But I wasn't built to roll over. I started showing up to every HOA meeting, reading the rules, right back to them handing out copies to neighbors. People started listening, and I guess that rattled Trina because that's when she brought in the heavy machinery, literally. Claimed it was for tree removal on the empty lot next door. No permit, no flagged trees, just a big yellow crane parked suspiciously close to my fence. I saw two guys from her cousin's construction company poking around with a measuring tape, so I called the city. They'd never heard a peep about any crane permit. Classic. And then one morning, while my daughter Kinsey was at her mom's, thank God for small mercies, my neighbor calls me in a panic. "Nailing, a crane just fell on your house. I don't even remember driving home, I was shaking so bad." I turned the corner, and there it is, a mechanical javelin straight through my ceiling. Cops, news vans, neighbors everywhere, and there's Trina standing on the curb looking annoyed like the thing had ruined her day. I ask her point blank, "What the hell did you do?" She just shrugs, tells me it's an accident. Maybe I should have moved my van and saunters off. Unbelievable. But here's the thing, she didn't know who she was messing with. I had cameras. I had receipts, every email, every board decision, every permit denial. She thought she could silence me, but she just handed me a megaphone. Curtis, the city inspector, shows up and nearly drops his clipboard when he sees the mess. No active permit. He says major code violation, possibly criminal. I get the contractor's name, Vantage Point Services. Rings a bell because that's Trina's cousin's outfit, same company she'd been pushing in meetings. I tell Curtis, "This isn't just a mistake. This is payback." He looks at me like I'm crazy. But when I lay out the pattern, bogus fines, harassment, now a crane in my living room, he starts taking notes for real. That night I call up my buddy Raffy, a building code lawyer, and lay it all out for him. He groans, says, "You again," but when I say crane through my house, he goes dead quiet. "You can't sue the HOA unless you've got evidence of criminal conspiracy," he says. "But if you do, if the board used funds or authority for personal revenge, that's a different story." Well, lucky for me, I'd been stockpiling documents for months, meeting minutes, vendor contracts, HOA spending reports. Trina had pushed through a land beautification budget not long ago, and the money went right to Vantage Point for emergency site prep, signed off by her and her VP Clark Minden, a guy who wore cufflinks to the neighborhood potluck and once tried to tow a car for having the wrong bumper sticker. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor staring at the hole in my ceiling, laptop on my knees, building a timeline. By sunrise, I had the pattern clear as day. Fake projects, phantom payments, everything circling back to Trina and her inner circle. At City Hall, I asked for 2 years of vendor logs, and when I mentioned the words criminal investigation, they handed them right over. Turns out Vantage Point had been paid over $200,000 for jobs that never happened. And 5 days before the crane hit my house, a fat payment for emergency site prep. With evidence in hand, I marched it right down to the precinct. The officer at the desk didn't even finish his coffee before calling in a detective. So let me get this straight. The HOA president paid her cousin's company without a permit, dropped a crane on your house, and called it an accident. Exactly. By the end of the week, the DA's office opened a formal investigation. Raffi filed a civil suit against Trina Clark and the HOA. The insurance adjuster took one look at my house and shook his head. This'll take a while. But I wasn't about to let this drag out. That's when I organized a neighborhood meeting. Not an HOA meeting, a real one out on the green. I brought copies of the payments, the timeline, even a statement from the crane operator admitting he was told to get as close to my property line as possible from the top. People started asking questions: why dues had tripled, why playground repairs never happened, why Trina's Lexus suddenly had a new paint job, and why Clark's deck looked like it belonged on a cruise ship. The next day I get a cease and desist letter for spreading defamatory claims. I add it to the evidence pile. A week later, Trina gets served. She opens the envelope right there in front of the neighbors, slams her door so hard it rattles. Court date set. Meanwhile, the city freezes all HOA funds. One board member resigns, another posts an anonymous apology. But Trina. She doubles down, tries to hold a secret meeting to suspend my membership. I show up with 2 detectives and a subpoena. One flashes his badge, "Not tonight." You should have seen the look on her face, not just anger, but real bone-deep fear. The trial felt like a bad dream. Cold courtroom judge with all the warmth of a parking meter, Trina in her navy blazer, Clark twitching beside her, their lawyer throwing up smoke and mirrors. But the facts were clear. The subpoenaed records showed emails between Trina and the contractor. If Carrick keeps pushing, we'll make an example out of him. Let's see how he reacts to a little property damage. The jury heard that, and you could feel the air go still. The crane operator took the stand and under oath repeated what he'd been told: make sure he gets the message. The city's accountant found over $70,000 in consulting fees routed through a shell company owned by Clark's brother-in-law. By the 3rd day, the case cracked wide open. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Trina and Clark ordered to pay every cent back plus damages. Vantage Point lost their license, barred from public work for 5 years. But what really mattered was the state AG launching a criminal case. The next week, Trina and Clark were arrested: conspiracy, fraud, misuse of funds. No cameras, just 2 ex-tyrants led out in cuffs. Clark muttered something at me. Trina kept her eyes forward like maybe she could pretend it wasn't real. And it wasn't just me. 3 other families filed claims for fake fines, phantom landscaping, threats of foreclosure. The city took over, put the HOA under receivership. And this time, the neighborhood showed up. Elections with city oversight, mandatory audits, and for the first time in years, people actually talked to each other. I didn't run for anything. My house got patched, insurance came through, and neighbors I barely knew brought casseroles, beers, even a grill out on a Tuesday night. Justice didn't fix the hole in the ceiling, but it fixed something deeper. A few weeks later, I got called to the old HOA office. Melinda Cross, the receiver, stood behind a folding table stacked with folders labeled "Old Correspondence," inside letters threatening residents with fines for projects that never existed, even fake foreclosure warnings. A spreadsheet tracked every homeowner by compliance level: green, yellow, red. I'd been marked hostile the week I challenged the van fine. Melinda leaned in and said, "This is racketeering. State investigators built a RICO case." Turns out Trina and her board had been burying illegal clauses in annual renewal forms, giving themselves power to do just about anything, including drop a crane on someone's home. By month's end, new charges dropped: mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering. The news ran wild with it. 40 families claimed restitution. The court seized Trina's lake house, Clark's condo. $400,000 recovered, distributed to victims. At sentencing, Trina tried for leniency, blamed her duty to the community. The judge cut her off. That's not leadership. That's exploitation. 9 years for her, 11 for Clark, lifetime bans for the rest. The HOA's new charter stripped the board of power without a vote, required open contracts, and gave homeowners a real say. A month later, the whole neighborhood threw a potluck. Someone baked a cake shaped like a crane with frosting, rubble, and all. My daughter Kinsey ran wild, laughing louder than I'd heard in a year. That's what mattered most, that she could grow up somewhere fairness meant something. As the sun set, a neighbor I'd never met shook my hand and said, "Thanks for standing up." I just smiled and said, "You don't have to be loud, just right and patient." That night I hung the photo of the crane in my hallway, not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as proof. Proof that no matter how heavy the machinery, how loud the bullies, or how tight their grip, the truth, when you hold on to it and refuse to let go, can crack the foundations wide open. So here's my question for you. What would you have done if it had been your house, your family? Where do you draw the line between rules and real justice? Drop a comment below. Tell me your story, because the only thing stronger than one voice is a community that finally finds its own.